Oh, hello there. I think we are live, and welcome to the Sunday streaming edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we're going to clown around and maybe even laugh a little. Ooh, I know that's not allowed anymore. But we're going to try to do it today because I want to talk about the best musical comedians and satirists of all time. As always, when we're labeling and ranking, we need to sort of define what these things mean, and they mean different things to different people. So I'm going to throw in everyone there, including people who are comedians foremost, but use music as a vehicle for the comedy. I'm also going to talk about people who are foremost musicians, but use comedy and satire as a significant element to their music. And I'm going to talk about people that surround both of those worlds and that have used them to make us all laugh. Now, comedy in general is something very interesting because comedy is subject to more attacks than almost any other form of artwork or artistic expression. And on the one hand, this might seem kind of odd because the goal of comedy is to make you laugh. There are other goals, there is subtext. Think of George Carlin and his politics, his philosophy, his preaching, his lay preaching, you could say. But at the forefront of the very definition of comedy, it's to make people laugh. And laughter is generally an expression that's associated with the emotion of happiness and joy and all the rest of it. So comedians aren't out there to make people feel sad, and yet they come under a lot of attack. And that's because all comedy, but satire in particular, is all about exposing the pomposity and the ridiculousness of people and things that want to be taken seriously, which is something I've never quite understood. I've never quite understood why it matters if you're being taken seriously. If you're making a serious point in a particular moment, I could understand wanting that point to be taken seriously. If you're speaking honestly, I would understand that you would want to be received with the same honesty that you're given. But the whole let's just take ourselves seriously 24/7, 369, and all of that jazz, that I don't get. And maybe we'll be exploring some of these themes as we get into this list of people. So, without further ado, I'm not going to present these people in any particular order. Just going to wet the whistle. It's all vodka, by the way. Just kidding, or am I? And we're just going to go through what I think makes each one of these performers special and unique and important. So, first off, I'm going to start with someone who very much came from the world of music and not from the world of comedy. In fact, he came from the world of virtuoso music composition, virtuosic performance, virtuosic everything. And this is one of my favorite men of all time, Frank Zappa. Now, Frank Zappa's comedy, his satire, came through in the form of his lyrics. It was social commentary that targeted everyone from presidents and Michael Jackson to the people in his band that ate various humorous things or got various fungi on appendages. And he was hilarious. And one of the comments, and it would be, I think it was from some up his own bottom type of reporter from the BBC or one of those other arrogant places. Who else? Zappa. Well, don't you think more people would take you seriously if you didn't have these lyrics? And he just looked at them in bemusement. The music's brilliant, the lyrics are brilliant, and put them together, it's a feast for the senses, whether you're a musician, because most musicians really like Frank Zappa. And even if you don't understand the complexities of the music that he's putting out there, the lyrics are so fun and they nail so much. And they're fun for the whole family to enjoy, unless you're typical. Next on our list, Blowfly. Now, Blowfly had two lives. He was a songwriter and a vocalist who did sort of straight up R&B, soul, and funk music as Clarence Reed. One of his more famous songs, as under his real name, was "Living Together is Keeping Us Apart," and that's been sampled by a lot of hip hop artists over the years. But he always had a funny side. And this came out in the form of Blowfly, who dressed up like a sort of comical superhero with the mask and the cape and everything. And his first big hit that wasn't ever allowed on the radio, but it made the rounds at house parties, particularly among Black Americans. And this was called Rap Dirty, one of a relatively early example of rap. And it was just hilarious, and there was some social commentary in there, to be sure. And He's done so many. He's done his sort of own songs from scratch. He's done parodies of existing songs. Otis Redding's "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay." I'm not sure if I can say the Blowfly title, but think of something that rhymes with sitting and is aided by a high fiber diet, and there you are. And he was just a legend, and everyone loved him in the hip hop community. Snoop Dogg was a huge fan, and even the guys in NWA, when they were doing what at the time was called reality rap, they assumed that their NWA records would be put in the bin with the subversive comedy stuff like Blowfly, not with your sort of mainstream R&B derived hip hop. But there you go. So Blowfly, an absolute legend, never made the money that he deserved, but may he rest in peace. Absolute legend. We're going to go a bit back in time and talk about Spike Jones, because Spike Jones did something that was really funny called Murdering the Classics, where he would take well-known pieces of classical music of the European genre from Liszt or Tchaikovsky or Beethoven, and he'd play the music with funny instruments, bicycle horns and the rest of it. He'd be dancing around. It would be really funny. And Spike Jones, yeah, he's someone that people either like or dislike. He divides people. In the band Up on Cripple Creek, there's even a joke about that. But his satirical songs, his Murdering the Classics, were not only pioneering, especially in the early days of television, but I actually think that they really stand up against the test of time, or they stand the test of time. Now going to the 70s, but someone who's very much still performing today, Swamp Dogg. Now, Swamp Dogg was much more than satire, because he'd sung a lot of straight songs, and he even sung one of the most heart-wrenching songs ever, and that's his cover of John Prine's anti-war classic, Sam Stone. And I just love the soulful rendition that Swamp Dogg does of it. And he was very political at times. God Isn't Blessing America was one, again in this Vietnam era, Artificial World. And he did a lot of stuff that was just very comedic about ex-wives, about what it's like living in LA, Come to LA. Very, very funny song. And he could get a bit dirty too, not as dirty as Blowfly, but he sort of ran the gamut. And he even said about himself, he said that he essentially took the country and Western style of singing and made it soulful. And so when you look at that origin story full of Swamp Dogg, a lot of it starts to make musical sense. Really great guy. He's still out there performing. He's old, but he's still doing it. So I definitely think he is worthy of being on this list. I'm going to say Todd Rundgren also. Now, Todd Rundgren, obviously, very sophisticated musician, great sense of chordal harmony in his compositions, but he also could be very satirical. He did one album at the beginning of the Reagan era called Swing to the Right, which was sort of a parody on right-wing politics. He did one called Deface the Music, get it? Ha ha ha. And so for those two alone, and some of his other stuff, I think his wit, his humor, sometimes it's super subtle and sometimes it can be dark, but I definitely think he, as a great musician, is worthy of being on this list. Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman's probably best known as a physical comedian, but the Elvis stuff that he did that sort of made him big, where he came up to the stage speaking in a fictitious foreign accent, very broken English, the thank you very much, and then he comes out with the best Elvis impersonation ever, and he's actually singing with the full-throated, full diaphragm Elvis voice. Andy Kaufman, definitely a musical comedian. Now, here's someone that isn't a comedian per se, but he's certainly a comical host, and that's Dr. Demento. And what made him special is he gave a huge break to satirists, to weirdos, to comical musicians who would have never ever gotten their records on AM or FM radio. Some of these people were obscure, and some of them became quite big. He's the personal curator of what's probably the biggest individual collection of comedic and satirical musical content. He himself was very funny. He had the voice, he had the catchphrases. He definitely deserves to be on this list. And one of the people that he helped to propel to the mainstream is probably the most successful musical comedian ever. And this is Weird Al Yankovic. I've done a video on him before. Everyone knows his story pretty much by now, but he took parody to new heights because he made an entire career out of doing relatively PG, but more clever than people realize, parodies of everything from My Sharona, My Bologna, Bad, Fat, Beat It, Eat It, Like a Virgin, Like a Surgeon, um, Amish Paradise, Gangster's Paradise. The list could go on, but no one took it further. And by becoming so successful, I think he kind of blazed a trail for people to do this and actually make a living at it. But of course, there were people that came before him who were mainstream. Spike Jones was mainstream, as was Victor Borge. Now, Victor Borge was a proper classically trained pianist, but he was most well known for his musical satire. And there was physical comedy involved. There was the playing of the piano itself that he did in a comical manner. There were his parodies. He was just a legend, whether on television, which he used to be a lot, he's dead now, or whether in Vegas. Victor Borge was a huge, huge attraction and supremely talented at that. One of my favorite stand-ups of all time, Sam Kinison. Now, Sam Kinison was obviously known more for his comedy, but he could play a mean rock and roll guitar. And he was, his voice with the shouting, tailor-made for heavy metal. And he recorded what I think is one of the best versions of J.J. Cale's I'm Going Down. Check it out. It's on YouTube. You should definitely listen to it. He came out with music albums. He would incorporate music into his comedy. Such a legend. I just freaking love Sam Kinison. And another one who died far too soon. Who else have we got on this list? Tom Leher. Now, Tom Leher was almost on the more geeky side of satire, but in the heady days of the beatniky 50s, he was very famous. Who's Next, about nuclear weapons, how times have changed, was a very big one, as was Nikolai Ivanovich Lobachevsky, a satire about a fake plagiarizer, but which sort of paved the way for some famous hoaxes of today. Very heady stuff, very beatniky, but very cool as well. And he's the inspiration for the youngest person on this list, a man who, as a satirist, goes by the name of Foundering. Now, Foundering is generally found on X, formerly Twitter, and this guy, in the style of Tom Leher, but goes after everyone. If Tom Leher met sort of Eric Cartman, that would be Foundering. Very talented musician. I've done some research on him. Used to do Postmodern Jukebox, used to tour with them. So really, really capable and talented pianist and all-around musician. But his satire stuff is wicked. It's absolutely hilarious. Not necessarily for the faint of heart, because he attacks everyone and everything. But that is the job of satire. So check him out on on X because that's where you can find his stuff. Now, I mentioned South Park, Trey Parker and Matt Stone. They absolutely deserve to be on this list. They write music, they sing music, they're responsible for some of the most memorable comedy songs of the last 25 years, from Chocolate Salty Balls to Kyle's Mom is a Big Fat Bitch, to one of the ones they did. They were making fun of, I think it was High School Musical, and a song about bullying with Cartman talking about his vajayjay. You just have to hear it. There's what was it? Jacking It in San Diego, about that guy who did the oh, he did this film about paying it forward or something like that. But he went. You Google it, you'll see what the reference is. But Trey Parker and Matt Stone, and just about, I think it was last year, they sort of really indulged their musical side, and they went to Red Rock Amphitheater in Colorado, and they did all of the music they did for South Park, for Team America, World Police, from other things that they've done together. And they brought along their friends, Primus, Rush, members of Rush, others. Was Les Claypool from Primus, obviously, Geddy Lee, and Alex Lifeson from Rush. And it was just a really fun evening for the whole family. Isaac Hayes sadly had died by then, but Isaac Hayes, not a comedy singer, but he did sing comedy songs when he was part of South Park. And since we're talking about cartoons, we've got to put on Seth MacFarlane, a Family Guy, because he himself is actually a very, very good singer. He loves that sort of what they call classic pop. Think Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Andy Williams. And he goes around and actually sings straight, serious songs from the Great American Songbook. But there's loads of original music from Family Guy, and he's doing most of the singing. He's a true musician, and the fact that he's incorporated it into one of the longest running satire shows is a great credit to him, and he's very funny as well. Who else on the list? Adam Sandler in the 90s dominated the 90s with his musical comedy, making fun of everything from religious holidays, from his family background, to lunch ladies, to Spanish teachers at a high school. It was all very juvenile, but very clever and very poetic at the same time. And he's incorporated music into many of his films. The Wedding Singer, hello, he was the wedding singer, which allowed him to indulge his musical side. And I definitely think he opened a lot of doors for people in that respect. Dana Carvey, who was on Saturday Night Live at the same time. The Chopping Broccoli song, you have to love it. His parody of Neil Young, Dead Dog Lying in a Ditch, wonderful stuff. And Dana sadly lost his son to addiction, I think, recently. So, but he's still out there, I think, doing his podcast. Absolutely, not just a great impressionist, but a great musical impressionist. Bill Bailey. Bill Bailey's had a pretty long and steady career, mostly in the UK and parts of the Europe where they speak English. He's quite popular in Holland, but he did something around 10 years ago called Bill Bailey's Guide to the Orchestra, which was a comedic introduction to the anatomy of the modern symphony orchestra. And I was seriously impressed by that. I don't know if it's on YouTube or if you can buy it from Amazon or something, but it's around. It's not that old. So definitely check it out. Another bona fide true musician. Really, really great stuff. Cheech Marin of Cheech and Chong, his song Born in East LA. There was a film of the same name. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And Cheech and Chong were always sort of one foot in drug culture, but also one foot in music culture. The drum set in the back of the car and Up in Smoke. So definitely very much a part of the culture of musical comedy. Let's see who else I have on this list. Monty Python. Now, Monty Python are probably the most famous sketch comedy troupe in the whole world, but music was an important part of their whole ethos. They went and did records, Never Be Rude to fill in every ethnic group that you can think of. Very funny song. Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. That's sort of an instant classic. And so music is definitely a part of Monty Python. Very, very funny stuff, witty, absurdist, absolutely brilliant. Sticking with the great English and British comedians, Benny Hill, singer and poet. Some of his satire songs are literally the best of all time. Now, a lot of people will know Benny Hill more for his physical comedy. After all, Benny Hill is one of the most famous international comedians ever. But what a lot of people who might not speak English as their first language don't know is that he was not only a great physical comedian, but a great verbal comedian. He wrote comical poetry all the time. He did music that was hilarious. There was even one episode where he does for an hour an entire satire of Bizet's Carmen. It's pretty much the full opera with the original score and all of the lyrics written by Benny Hill in the comic style. When I first saw that, as someone who loves comedy and loves music, my mind was absolutely blown open. I hope that's lingering somewhere on there, on YouTube or somewhere else, because it is absolutely hilarious. Nipsey Russell. You heard that right. Not Nipsey Hussle, who he's named for, but or who named himself after him, but Nipsey Russell, a great poet who was always there for quick improvisational poems that always had a kind of fun, happy, and surprise ending. Now, is poetry music? It's certainly related to music, and I would say that the hip hop community was absolutely influenced by both the improvisational poetry and the written poetry of the 70s era, whether it was the serious social commentary of people like Gil Scott Heron or the witticisms of Nipsey Russell, because hip hop has a lot of humor in it. It's a very serious genre in terms of some of the lyrics, social commentary, conscious hip hop, but it's also a genre where humor and wit is a huge part of things. And I think Nipsey Russell was absolutely a huge part of that. Who else is on this list? Steve Martin. Steve Martin was absolutely a musical satirist. King Tut, very well known in the late 70s and throughout his career, with ukulele in hand, he did musical satire, as did Eddie Murphy. Now, Eddie Murphy had a real voice and recorded a straightforward modern pop album in the 80s, My Girl Wants to Party All the Time. But he also did impressions of musicians, so many of them. And my favorite is James Brown. His James Brown impression is absolutely marvelous. And because he is someone, Eddie Murphy, who can actually sing, he knows his music, I absolutely think that Eddie Murphy should be on this list. Who else can we think of? I think I've more or less exhausted the list, but I'm sure that if we stick around, more people will, in fact, come to mind. Um, One of the things that I think is really special about comedy is that it can introduce us to a lot of other art forms. And this is particularly true of satire, because satire is necessarily poking fun at something which pre existed the satire. And so, if someone, let's just take Weird Al, an obvious example. When Weird Al is making fun of a band that might be old, someone might get back in touch with that music using Spotify, going to the record store, whatever, because comedy is sort of ageless, and satire in particular. There is always going to be something to satirize, and therefore, people like Weird Al are forever young. And people can now go to his back catalog and say, well, what's this song that I like that he's parodying from 1983? I want to go back and listen to it. So, in an artistic sense, satire is the lost form of art to die. When other forms of art degenerate, become compromised, lose their essence, become outdated, become rejected by the public, there is always comedy. Because even in the worst of times, there is something to mock. Some could argue that the worst of times is actually a time where I just dropped something, never mind, is a time where comedy has the most fuel. to burn through, because the worse, the worse the better for comedy, because there's that much more to satirize. If everything was peaceful and happy, you have to struggle a bit harder to find something to satirize. On the other hand, because we're living in an age of increased censorship that is weirdly, paradoxically coexisting in an era where there are more technical avenues to reach people with your art or with your commentary, it's also difficult for satirists, because they don't know if they're going to get censored for saying the things that want to make them laugh. So again, it's this dualism. And we've got a comment, which is always appreciated, from Andy McKinney. Yep, Bill Bailey, absolutely wonderful. And uh, Jim Jim Eon. I think I might be pronouncing that wrong, but I'm definitely going to check that out. So thank you, Andy, for that great suggestion, and keep them coming. I'm going to try to rack my brain to think of any that I might have forgotten. The Tubes. Now, I've done a video on the Tubes before, and I compared some of their lyrics, some of their biting social commentary, to some of the Frank Zappa stuff, some of the Todd Rundgren stuff we mentioned. So they're a very serious band, very talented musicians. If you were to take sort of Toto style music with a punky attitude and a Frank Zappa style of satire and social commentary, you'd get the Tubes. And so definitely check them out. And you could maybe put the Dead Kennedys on there, Jello Biafra, known primarily as a band with very scathing political commentary, but satire was a part of it as well. The very name of the band suggests satire. So yeah, Dead Kennedys, I would definitely put them in this list. Butthole Surfers from a slightly later era, you could put them in there too. You could also say Two Live Crew, because they were sort of mocking the seriousness of the music industry that tried to take itself overly serious. And while most of their songs are, sex stuff, check out Banned in the USA. It's very, very much a satire with a very important anti censorship message. So they were satirizing Bruce Springsteen, but with a very important message. And the list could go on and on, but I guess we'll call it there for a day. Let me know in the comments other great musical clowns, comedians, and satirists who have put a smile on your face over the years. It's a new channel, it's a growing channel, and I don't know how to grow it, but I'm just going to keep doing what I do. So, like, subscribe, send it to a friend or an enemy. A click's a click. And ring that little bell, which apparently helps me because it helps YouTube to alert you when either I'm live or during the week when I put out my short form videos. Like, subscribe, and take care. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.